Well, hello there, and welcome to day 80 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. And we are back into the MCU Retrospective as we have now reached our third film and our first sequel with Iron Man 2. So, rather than trying to review this film, because I don't really see the point in it, I really sort of wanted to use it as an exercise to examine what you might call the franchise building sequel. Because watching this, it really made me think of, well, two things. One, after my video on Scott Snyder, that's a comic book writer, I meant Zack Snyder. After my video on Zack Snyder's Justice League and my discussion of Batman vs Superman, and then my video, and then The Mandalorian did a rather, there was rather an amusing sketch done about The Mandalorian. It really made me reflect on those three properties, and I suppose the strange point at which you begin to... producers and creatives and directors of films really begin to decide that they are going to take a film that has been a success and is part of a greater network and then go, okay, now is the point in which we take this property and use it as a vehicle for a greater expanded universe. And yes, in storytelling terms, it's a universe because, of course, people enjoy the interconnectedness of it and the fact that characters can interact from film to film and it can culminate in some grand narrative. But from a production standpoint, or rather from a franchising standpoint, it's a case of going, how can we take this one property and expand it into something that really, has greater marketability and financial value than just a single film. In the 80s, you had things like police academies and comedies found it very easy to go, oh, this works, so if we keep making sequels to this, people will keep buying them or keep going to see them at the cinema and then buying them for VHS, as long as we stick to the same formula. And similarly, the function is that people will not only want to see the sequels to this film, but they will want to see the films that are interconnected with it. And so, the Marvel Cinematic Universe did it in a way that no previous franchise achieved. The idea that people have now don't just see Iron Man films, but they see all the Thor films, all the Captain America films, the Ant-Man films, the Black Panthers. And yes, not every cinema goer sees every single Marvel Cinematic Universe film, but a huge proportion of people do. And so you might get your people who only see the Iron Man films and the Avengers films, and then you may get your people who see all of them. But the point being is that you've built this self-perpetuating machine. But the problem, I suppose, is sort of balancing out the creative vision of a film and the fact that cinema is about making films and having a narrative from beginning to end that you want to tell, rather and then balancing that with wanting to make this grand franchise machine, this extended universe, this interconnected narrative. Because the big question or the comment that people make about the Marvel Cinematic Universe is it becomes episodes of a TV series almost that is just by chance this grand series of feature films, but they are episodes of what you would call the Marvel TV series of feature films. And it's hard to balance that, and I think what I'll discover as I go through this is where it succeeded and where it failed, and where trying to balance those two things really it was a struggle and has continued to be a struggle. But what I suppose I attach to Iron Man 2 is the point in which the problem emerges where they use a single film with a singular narrative, but they insert into it this the seeds and the references and the intertextual relationship with the future of the franchise. Because Iron Man 2 at its heart should have been about mortality. That if you look at the 3 Iron Man films, each one has a particular theme. The first one is about culpability, the second one is about mortality, and the third one is about post-trauma. And at the heart of the second one, it wanted to do a simple story about the self-destructiveness of someone who is facing their terminal mortality. Sorry, I realise that's a tautology, but my point being someone who is imminently going to die, and the ways in which they are trying to facilitate things for the people they care about, whilst also enjoying the time they have left. And that ties back into the culpability of Iron Man 1 and the ideas of, he not only does Iron Man still have, does Tony Stark still have responsibility for the actions the things that have been done in his name and his company's name, but now he has a ticking clock in which to achieve those that culpability and to really make up for some of the sins of the past. And it's quite a mature and complex idea. And the problem is that it then has to contend with the fact that the obvious comic book influence is Demon in the Bottle, which of course is a storyline that deals with Tony Stark's alcoholism and the destructive power of his alcoholism. But the problem is that those narratives aren't the same. And I don't know if originally Jon Favreau wanted to just do a closer adaptation of that narrative, because the truth is, and people speculate on this time and time again, that was never going to happen. It frankly is the case that Disney or Paramount or Marvel Studios were never going to let Iron Man be an alcoholic, because there was still this perception that to some degree these films are children's films, and your inspirational hero can't be a an alcoholic who would then become a recovering alcoholic. And it's a shame, because I think that's an important and mature narrative that really could have been handled quite well. But I also see the fact that is something that children wouldn't be able to process or understand, and it's confronting them with adult themes that really isn't relevant to children. But then you could also argue, is mortality something that children really should have to deal with? And the idea of someone who is even though it's ridiculous comic book science fiction reasons for dying, he is still dying, and children are still going to have to face that theme. When we get to Iron Man 3, you really see the flip side of that, where you have a director who just wanted to deal with quite complex themes, and a slightly more confident-ish Marvel Cinematic Universe that allowed him to do so, and that has its own series of problems that I'll get to. But like I say, the problem here is that it suggests and it infers the ideas, and that's the problem overall with this film, is it suggests and infers in things that it should be explicit about, and it's explicit in things that it should be inferring. So when you get to the issues of the fact that this film spend so much time. I suppose it's one of three things. You have the narrative as I've presented it, the one about mortality, the actual narrative Jon Favreau wants to tell. Then you have the fact that the creatively they, as a sequel, it's attached. It's going back to the original, and of course it's the sequel problem where it goes back to the first film and goes, what did people love? They loved the chemistry of Tony and Pepper. Obviously, they love the action set pieces. They love the witty banter and the fact that Tony Stark is the smartest man and the sharpest man in the room and can talk out anyone. And so you have, and you know, they therefore want to do all of those things, and they want to reference characters from the first one. So you have the reporter from the first one, who in the original Iron Man had a very clear function, whereas in this film is there because she was a character from the first one. You could almost to some degree say the same about Phil Coulson, although that ties into the third section, I suppose. But again, because he was in the first one, he should have a small cameo in this one. But the problem is then you're bringing in new characters and new plot lines that really, referencing back to the first film, only convolutes it. And then you have this third thing, which is the grand plan. And so you have things like they established Natasha Romanoff. They refer back to S.H.I.E.L.D. and the big plan for the Avengers initiative. They also drop things like they start to sort of lay the scene. Of course, the after credit scene with the Hammer of Thor, but that's fine. And these things individually are fine. But again, this narrative is starting to get convoluted. And then on top of that, you also have things like they want to set up War Machine. And then you have things like, you know, you have your villain in Whiplash and Hammer Tech, and you think, and it just becomes such an overweighted narrative because you have all of these things going on, and it's struggling to service any one of these things. Now, that's not to say it fails to, because it does just about manage to do the mortality storyline, and it does set up War Machine well. I love the fact that, as I mentioned in Iron Man 1, the transition from the original actor to Don Cheadle is such a funny one. And the fact that in this film, what happens is, I love the line, it's me, I'm here, get over it. And that is such a wonderful meta-textual way to go. Don Cheadle is Rhodey. That's it. Sorry, accept it. And that's a great way to be able to just acknowledge it and move on. But the problem you then have is the fact that you have Rhodey in place, and you have him having this sort of back and forth with Iron Man. But because they need to set up the tension between them and the War Machine stuff, you don't get a chance for them to really like each other. Like, from point one, their relationship is quite combative. And it's a shame, because actually, as it transpires towards the end of the film and into the further films, Don Cheadle and Robert Downey Jr. do have actually very good chemistry and a really nice, witty rapport. But you don't really get that to start with. It starts quite combative and aggressive, and that seems a shame, because it feels, and I think this is the problem with the film, it feels like this film is missing its first act, thematically speaking, that because it's trying so desperately to pick up the strands from the first one, it almost feels like it doesn't need to start. It just drops you in the film, and everyone's bantering, and you're having these quick, witty scenes, and it cuts from funny, witty, you know, slightly manic, not slightly, very manic scenes of characters interacting with one person and the next, to quite convoluted set pieces. And the film struggles to breathe, and it struggles to breathe with all of these things going on. And I think that's the problem, and I think like I say, referring back to what I said at the beginning about Batman vs Superman had a very similar problem, in that Batman vs Superman didn't want to just do the Batman versus Superman storyline. It wanted to do the creation of the Justice League, and it wanted to do Lex Luthor's convoluted plan, and it wanted to do Doomsday and the death of Superman. And it, again, it lacks that narrative drive where it's a case of what if you were to watch this film in isolation, would you feel like you were watching a film, or would you feel like you're watching the middle piece in a puzzle, or in a series of dominoes? And it does to some degree feel like that. As I mentioned, the other comparison is Mandalorian. Now, the Mandalorian, the reason is that, like I say, there is a great sketch, and I'll link it below in the description, from a comedy group called The Warp Zone. And the way the sketch works is that the Mandalorian is a character who also is aware of the franchise he's in, and he's talking to an executive from Disney. And how the conversation transpires is that the Mandalorian goes from thinking, I am now the master of this franchise, I lead Star Wars, I am the one who essentially people come to see, and it is the future of the Star Wars franchise going forward. But what you realise from, and the revelation of this is the fact that, Series 2 of Mandalorian, and he uses the line, you Iron Man 2'd me. And that's a great way to describe this, which is, Mandalorian Series 2, though does have its plot there at its core, is so busy setting up all of the other things that are going forward in Star Wars that it can't, and all the references and the exciting cameos and things, that it somewhat forgets to give its character a definitive arc. And that's being a little disingenuous. It does have that, and it's nowhere near as muddied as this is, or as muddied as Batman versus Superman is. But it's there. It's the problems are the same, and they're parallel, which is, ultimately you need to tell your story. You need to be able to just tell a clear story. There is one other comparison that comes to mind, which is that, which isn't even a sequel. It's I've written quite extensively about the Dark Universe and the desperation for the Universal to have its Dracula, Frankenstein's Bride, Wolfman, Mummy, all of those in a connected universe. And you had Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise's Mummy was one of the several attempts to kickstart this. But that was a first film in a series, and that film was exactly the same problem, where it's, instead of trying to be a film, it's trying to be the first chess piece, the first puzzle piece, sorry. And so it isn't a film, it is simply the setup for this franchise. And the point being there is that isn't even the sequel. That's the first film in the series, and that demonstrates that you need to be telling a clear story. Iron Man 1 is pure because it just tells a simple, clear story with characters with their own individual arcs, internal logic, and you could watch Iron Man beginning to end, never watch another MCU film, and you would feel contented. And the problem with Iron Man 2 is it doesn't. I don't think you could watch this without going, so this. What am I need to be watching next? And we'll see this a lot in the MCU. We'll see this. There'll be films that really fail and have this problem. There are films that seem to be able to carry this. I have visions of Avengers, Age of Ultron having this problem as one of the examples. And conversely, I suppose, the thing which I thought was a shame now, 10 plus years on, is primarily Sam Rockwell as Justin Hammer, who I thought, looking back, I'm like, Sam Rockwell, like Don Cheadle, is the other new element. Oh, and sorry, Scarlett Johansson is very good in this. And even though it's quite weird to see her this young and this sort of fresh, it feels like proto Black Widow. it's like, oh wow, this is great to see you as you know, considering the arc that she goes on all the way to the Black Widow film that we will get eventually sometime this year. But the thing that I thought was a shame is the fact that Sam Rockwell is the third character who they set up, and you think, oh, that will be a great recurring villain, a great character who will be a problem but won't be the primary problem of certain films. And then the unfortunate thing is they didn't follow up on it. And it's a shame, because I genuinely think Sam Rockwell makes a good Justin Hammer, and Justin Hammer would have made a great continuing foil for Iron Man films and probably Ant-Man films, and, you know, anything which is sort of techy would have had a great, you know, reference to Justin Hammer, or had him do a cameo or something. And knowing how the MCU goes, how it brings people back, and how it does this sort of people pop up when you don't expect them to, I would love to see him come back, and maybe he'll come back for this Armor Wars series they're going to do with Rhodes and, you know, as War Machine, and maybe that's really where his big triumphant return will come as an interesting villain. But yeah, I didn't hate the experience of watching Iron Man 2. It's very hard not to watch it forensically and not to watch it as a scattered piece of setup. But, you know, I can't say I didn't have fun. And I still think there will be significantly harder MCU films to watch not too far away. But for the moment, we've got Thor, we've got Captain America, we've got the Avengers film, so we've got some weeks of pleasure still to come. So, thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, and subscribe to the channel for more videos. This today is my 80th, so as you can imagine, there are a lot of videos to go back and watch, particularly if you're looking at the MCU Retrospective, when this is obviously the third in the series. If you could also share some of those videos, then again, that helps me build the channel. And if you want, please follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley. Thanks for joining me. Take care.